The studio lights were warm, but something in the air felt cold, tense, electric. It was supposed to be a calm panel, just another nationally televised debate on civil liberties and media responsibility. The usual political faces, polished words, careful smiles. Glenn Greenwald sat confidently in his chair, sleeves rolled to his elbows, voice smooth as always. His opening remarks were biting, laced with precision. "There's too much performance in politics," he said. "Too many progressive lawmakers who turn pain into photo ops, outrage into hashtags." He didn't name names yet, but everyone knew who he meant. The camera panned past Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. She sat poised, eyes steady, saying nothing. Inside her, though, a quiet storm was forming. Viewers at home felt it too. Something deeper was unfolding, something real. When Greenwald finally said her name, it was like a match striking dry wood. Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't rush. She simply leaned forward, her hands folded on the table. Her voice was calm, even warm. "Mr. Greenwald," she began, "may I ask you something?" The air shifted. The audience sat up straighter. No one knew it yet, but history was about to be made. Jasmine's tone was soft, almost too gentle for what was coming. "You said I use outrage like a brand," she began. "Do you believe that every woman who raises her voice in defense of justice is performing?" Greenwald blinked, lips parting slightly. "Congresswoman, I'm referring to..." She interrupted, not with force, but with clarity. "No, please, just answer that question." The silence was heavy. He shifted in his seat. "I believe some lawmakers exploit emotion for headlines." Crockett nodded. "Then let's talk about headlines. Were you performing when you covered Brazil's collapse and spoke of human suffering? Or did you believe those stories mattered?" A pause. The audience leaned in. "I believed in them," he said. "So do I," she replied. "When a child's life is shattered by a broken system, when a mother buries her son after a no-knock warrant went wrong, that's not performance. That's pain. Real pain." Her voice quivered for just a moment. Real. Raw. She breathed in, steadied herself. "I don't scream for screens. I speak because silence killed my cousin." Gasps. Greenwald's jaw tensed. The air grew thinner. This wasn't a debate anymore. It was something deeper, and Glenn had just stepped into her world. The cameras kept rolling, but the panelists forgot they were being watched. Jasmine leaned back, her eyes locked on Glenn. "My cousin was 17, she said, her voice like rain against glass. He was walking home. No weapon, no threat, just black." The room held its breath. A cop claimed he feared for his life. There was no body cam footage, just blood on the pavement. She paused. One tear slid down her cheek, but she didn't wipe it. "I stood in a courtroom and watched his mother break. And when the media came, they called it an unfortunate mistake. They called us angry, emotional, too loud." Greenwald lowered his eyes. "That's not a performance," she said. "That's surviving injustice." Her hands trembled slightly, but she kept them folded. "Do you still think I'm using outrage as a brand?" Greenwald looked stunned. Words wouldn't come. Crockett turned to the moderator. "If facts are performative, then truth has no home left." The room erupted into applause, but Crockett didn't smile. She just breathed deeply. Finally. Across the country, viewers wiped tears. Something had shifted. This wasn't about politics anymore. It was about truth and the cost of carrying it. And Glenn Greenwald had no defense. For years, Glenn Greenwald had built his name on conviction, unafraid, unshaken, razor-sharp in every debate. But now, as the cameras caught the slight twitch in his jaw, the nervous glance toward his notes, viewers sensed something unfamiliar. discomfort. Jasmine hadn't raised her voice. She didn't attack him. She simply told the truth, and that truth clung to the air like smoke. Greenwald finally cleared his throat. I wasn't aware of your cousin's story. I'm sorry." Jasmine nodded, but her eyes didn't soften. "I'm not here for apologies," she replied. "I'm here because you used your platform to question my sincerity without knowing what I've carried." A beat. "You made assumptions. But if you had asked instead of accused, maybe you'd understand why I speak the way I do." The panel moderator looked frozen, unsure whether to cut to break. The producers in the control room stared at their screens, whispering furiously into headsets. But no one dared interrupt, because something real was happening, something raw. Greenwald opened his mouth, then closed it again. For once, the man who always had something to say had nothing, and the audience at home felt it in their chest. Greenwald tried to pivot. "I respect your pain," he said, voice quieter now. But emotion doesn't always lead to clarity. Jasmine looked at him, her face unreadable. "Neither does detachment." It was a simple reply, but it landed like thunder. "For some of us," she continued, "our pain is our clarity. When the world keeps proving you don't matter, every word becomes a fight for survival." She leaned forward again, her voice a whisper now, but no one missed a syllable. "You speak of media responsibility. Let's talk about that. Where were the headlines when my cousin died? Where was the front page when his mother pleaded for answers?" She didn't blink. "You say emotion clouds the truth, but it's emotion that finally made people care. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Tamir Rice. Did logic wake this country up? Or was it pain broadcasted for all to see?" Greenwald exhaled, shaky. Behind the cameras, even the crew stood still. This wasn't an argument anymore. It was a reckoning. And as the silence settled back over the room, viewers across the nation found themselves crying for people they'd never met. Jasmine had done what few could. She made everyone feel again. Greenwald shifted in his seat once more. "But don't you think?" Jasmine held up one hand gently, stopping him. Not with anger, just truth. "You've spoken uninterrupted for years," she said. "Now just listen." She wasn't being dramatic. She was being direct. "For too long, people like me have been told to wait our turn, to stay respectful while our families mourn, to use the right tone while the ground beneath us shakes." She turned to the moderator. "This panel was supposed to be about civil liberties. But when those liberties are only protected for some, what are we even discussing?" Her voice grew steadier. "People want justice, not just laws. Dignity, not just data. You say I perform, but what you call performance is survival, advocacy, a demand to be seen." A long pause. Then she looked back at Greenwald. "I didn't come here to win an argument. I came here to make sure people like my cousin aren't erased by people like you, who think passion means propaganda." The room was silent again. No one dared respond. Because Jasmine Crockett wasn't asking for permission. She was telling the truth. And truth, real truth, doesn't need to shout. The segment had already gone over time. The producers whispered urgently in the control room, but no one cut to commercial. Why? Because the ratings were climbing. But more than that, America was watching, breathless. In homes, on phones, in airports and offices, people leaned closer to their screens, eyes locked on a woman who refused to flinch. Jasmine Crockett didn't shout. She didn't accuse. She simply held the pain of millions in her voice. And Glenn Greenwald? He wasn't the enemy. He was the symbol, the face of a media culture more comfortable critiquing tone than hearing truth. And he realized it. "I didn't mean to minimize your loss," he said, almost whispering. She didn't let him off easy. Intent doesn't always equal impact. She looked toward the camera then, not for drama, but for those watching. Some of you out there know what I'm talking about. You've buried loved ones and then been told to stay calm, to not make it about race, to just move on. Tears filled her eyes, but her voice remained firm. You don't have to be silent anymore. The chat feeds exploded. Viewers wept. Some stood from their couches without realizing why. Something sacred was happening live. The other panelists had barely spoken in 20 minutes. The moderator looked frozen. Even Greenwald was still. This wasn't a debate now. It was transformation. Jasmine leaned into the quiet. She didn't rush to fill the space. She let the silence say what words couldn't. Then softly, she spoke again. You asked if I was sincere, she said, turning back to Glenn. Let me ask you something now. He nodded slowly. Do you believe the stories you tell matter? Yes, he replied. Of course I do. She tilted her head. Then why question someone else's motive before understanding their truth? He didn't answer. Because when you do that, she continued, you don't just erase me. You erase every mother who's lost a child, every teen who never made it home, every community that lives in fear. A pause. Her voice lowered. And maybe the scariest thing is, you didn't even realize you were doing it. That landed hard, not just on him, but on the entire room. Greenwald looked down, not defeated, just exposed. And Jasmine, she sat back in her chair, not as a victor, but as someone who had fought for a piece of her truth to finally be seen. Backstage, staffers stood frozen, headphones off, hands over mouths. In the audience, you could hear sniffles. A few people wiped tears quietly. Jasmine didn't bask in the moment. She simply breathed. For years, she said, we've been told that the fight for civil liberties is a legal one, but it's also emotional, spiritual, personal. She glanced at the camera again gently. Because liberty doesn't mean anything if some of us are always told to earn it harder. Greenwald looked up. I see that now, he said, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard it. I do. Jasmine gave a slight nod. You don't have to agree with everything I say. You don't even have to like my style. But before you call it performative, ask yourself, would you speak differently if it were your brother in the casket? That question broke something open, not just in Glenn, but in the country, in homes across America. People who had never understood before finally did. Not because Jasmine Crockett shouted, but because she didn't. She just told the truth and let it echo. The walls weren't just cracking in that studio. They were cracking everywhere. Jasmine sat quietly for a moment, staring at the floor. Then, as if remembering something distant, she looked up and began speaking again. This time not to respond, but to share. When I was 9, she said softly, I saw my father cry for the first time. We were sitting in the car after church, and he got a call. A friend, another black man, was shot in his driveway while reaching for his wallet. Her voice wavered. I didn't understand it all back then. I just remember how he held the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. And then, the tears came. The studio was silent. He said something that stuck with me. He said, baby, if I ever don't make it home, speak louder than they'll let you. She looked directly at the camera. I didn't become a congresswoman to be famous. I did it because silence has never protected us. I speak because my father couldn't. Because my cousin didn't get a second chance. Tears streamed down her face quietly, naturally. She didn't hide them. Even Glenn swallowed hard. It was no longer a panel. It was a funeral, a courtroom and a battlefield, all at once. And America mourned with her. The moderators had given up on their scripts. The time limit was long forgotten. No one could stop what was happening. because it was no longer a segment. It was history unfolding. Greenwald finally spoke again, but this time his voice had changed. "I've spent my life trying to expose lies," he said. "But today I realized something. You don't always need to lie to cause harm. Sometimes, you just need to ignore someone else's truth." Jasmine nodded once. No triumph in her eyes, just tired honesty. "That's all we've wanted," she replied. "For someone to listen, to not rewrite our pain or call it strategy, just to hear us." She turned to the audience. "I know some of you are tired too. Tired of explaining why your grief is real, why your anger matters. Tired of being told that your voice is too much. But let me say this." She took a breath. "You are not too much. Your pain is real. Your story matters, and you don't need permission to speak your truth." The audience erupted into applause, not wild or chaotic, just deep, rising, broken-hearted applause, like a nation finally realizing it had stopped listening and wanted to start again. Glenn Greenwald leaned forward now, his hands no longer folded neatly. His confidence, so unshakable at the start, was replaced by something else: humility. "I owe you more than a response," he said to Jasmine. "I owe you an apology." He looked up, eyes glassy. "I was wrong. I made judgments without understanding your walk. I confused clarity with comfort." Jasmine didn't gloat. She simply nodded. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. "That means something." And it did. Because for once, the apology wasn't forced. It wasn't reactive. It wasn't about optics. It was human. Glenn continued. "You reminded me today that journalism isn't just about what we report. It's about what we choose not to see. And sometimes, the most dangerous silence is our own." He looked into the camera, unguarded. "To everyone I've ever spoken over or misunderstood, I hear you now." There were tears on his face. The studio, the audience, the world sat in stunned silence. Jasmine had done the unthinkable, not by humiliating her opponent, but by reaching the part of him no argument ever could. She didn't win a debate. She changed a man, and that changed everything. The segment finally went to commercial, late, but no one cared. The cameras cut, but no one moved. Backstage, staffers cried silently. One makeup artist wept into her sleeve. A producer who hadn't felt anything in years texted his teenage daughter, "You need to watch this, right now." Jasmine stepped off stage quietly, clutching a tissue but not her phone. She wasn't thinking about headlines or sound bites. She was thinking about her father, her cousin, every family who never got justice or airtime. Glenn approached her, still looking shaken. "Can I walk with you?" he asked. She nodded. They walked down the quiet hallway together. No cameras, no crowd. And the conversation continued. Not a performance, not a panel. Just two people finally speaking from the same place. Outside, something was happening. Viewers took to social media, not with hashtags, but with stories. They shared their pain, their silence, their rage, and their grief. A mother in Detroit posted, "I didn't know I needed to hear this tonight. Thank you, Jasmine." A teenager in Atlanta wrote, "I want to be like her when I grow up." The wave had started, not a viral trend, a reckoning, a remembering, and it was only the beginning. By morning, the world had changed. Clips of the exchange flooded every platform, not because of scandal, but because of truth. News anchors spoke slower that day with reverence. Commentators paused between words. For once, the noise quieted. And in that quiet, Jasmine's voice echoed. Classrooms played the segment. Churches prayed through it. Town halls quoted her. A protest in St. Louis paused to watch the full video on a giant screen. People stood still, holding each other. Even those who once criticized her for being too bold now found themselves rethinking everything. Because this time, there was no room to pretend. Glenn Greenwald released a statement. "I've interviewed presidents and whistleblowers, but last night, Jasmine Crockett taught me more than any of them. Her grace, her pain, her clarity made me realize the limits of my own understanding." The message went viral, but Jasmine didn't comment. She wasn't looking for praise. She was already back to work, meeting a grieving mother in Dallas, visiting a school in Memphis, holding a young man's hand at a detention center. Because for her, this wasn't a moment. It was a mission. And now, the world was finally ready to listen. The letters started coming 3 days later. Hundreds, then thousands. Handwritten notes, typed messages, drawings from children. One read, "My son was taken 5 years ago. I thought I was crazy for still crying. You reminded me I'm not." Another said, "You didn't yell, but you shook the country." One little girl, age 10, sent a crayon drawing of Jasmine standing in front of a storm. The caption read, "You are stronger than thunder." Jasmine read them in her quiet office at dawn, tears streaming down her face. She didn't reply to every letter, but she read every single one. One envelope had no return address. Inside was a note, scrawled in a shaky hand. "I'm a retired police officer. I've seen what you described. I was part of it once. I thought I was doing my job. Now I'm not so sure. I'm sorry. Please don't stop speaking." She sat with that note for a long time, because it wasn't just apology. It was awakening. Change was slow, always had been, but this was movement. And Jasmine Crockett, quietly, bravely, was leading it. Not with fists, not with fury, but with truth that refused to be ignored. 3 weeks later, Jasmine received an email she nearly deleted. It was from a National Journalism Foundation. They were giving her an honorary award, not for political leadership, but for truth-telling that transcended party lines, camera lights, and fear. She stared at the screen for a long time. She wasn't a journalist. She didn't deliver breaking news. She didn't have perfect grammar or crafted slogans. All she did was speak from a wound that never fully healed. And yet, here it was. An invitation to speak at their annual event in New York City. She almost declined. But then she remembered the girl who called her stronger than thunder. The mother who whispered, "Thank you," in Memphis. The retired officer who had finally said the word, "sorry." So she accepted. Not for the applause, not for the stage, but because she knew the truth always needed more room. At the event, she stood before hundreds of reporters, producers, and editors. And she said quietly, "Sometimes the most radical thing you can do is listen without needing to fix. Speak without trying to impress. Cry without calling it weakness." No clapping yet, just silence. Then, an ovation so full of tears the walls felt like they were breathing. 6 months passed. One chilly morning, Jasmine found herself back in her hometown in Texas. No cameras, no suits. Just her and a small crowd gathered at the corner where her cousin had been killed. The city had renamed the street Justice Way. His name was painted across a mural in bold, bright color, and beneath it, a quote from Jasmine's panel. "Truth doesn't shout, it just refuses to stay silent." She stood there quietly, alone, hand resting on the brick. A young boy walked up, maybe 11, maybe 12. He looked at her, eyes wide. "Are you the lady from TV?" he asked. She smiled softly. "Maybe." He nodded. "My mama said you spoke for us. She cried when you did." Jasmine knelt, meeting his eyes. "You can speak too," she said. "Your voice matters, always." He nodded again, then without a word, hugged her. Not because she was famous, but because she was honest. Behind her, cars honked in the distance. Life went on, but something had changed. In her city, in her country, and most of all, in the way people finally listened. She stood up, wiped her eyes, and smiled toward the sky. For her cousin, for her father, for them all. A year later, the segment was still being shown in classrooms, community centers, and family living rooms. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. People didn't just remember what Jasmine said. They remembered how they felt. The stillness, the crack in Glenn's voice, the way their own chests ached without warning. That pain stayed, but so did the hope. Jasmine never turned the moment into merchandise. She didn't chase the fame. She returned to her work, with more weight, more clarity, more power than ever before. Glenn Greenwald invited her to co-host a discussion series about political empathy. She agreed, on one condition. We don't perform, we listen. He agreed, and that series became something beautiful. Two former opponents, reshaping how America talked, and more importantly, how it heard. The night the first episode aired, Jasmine sat alone in her office, the lights low, her cousin's photo beside her. She whispered, "We're still here. They hear us now." Then she closed her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she rested because the truth had done its work, and it wasn't going anywhere. If this story moved you, if you cried, if you saw yourself in Jasmine, if you felt anything real tonight, don't scroll away. Subscribe, so stories like this don't get buried. Like, if truth, quiet truth, matters to you, comment. Tell us your story. We're listening. We really are. Because the world doesn't change with noise. It changes when someone dares to tell the truth, and someone else finally hears it. Thank you for staying till the end. We felt this with you, and we're not done yet.